to me as well. So I'll just wait for as the slides come up. Just to give a background. So in an ideal world, I would have had 20 years of post MBA experience. But because of the career break, I have 19. And I'll take you through some of the things that I have learned as part of my journey. And we can discuss further. And I am available to be in touch outside the webinar as well. So, that option is always there. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah. So this is something I want you all to think through, and we can discuss as towards the end of the webinar. What are the words that you associate with when you hear the word career break? And I think that is very important for us to be clear about what this means to each of us, because our reasons for the career break could be very different, and your association with what this means to you will make a lot of difference when you pitch your career break to future employers as well. Next slide, please. So just to give you a background in terms of my journey, I graduated in 2002, so I was a fresher when I went to IIM Indore in 2004. I finished in 2004, and my first job was with IBM, where I spent time between Bangalore and Mumbai. Then in 2006, I got my first, I switched jobs for the first time. I moved to consulting in Ernst & Young in the back then Gurgaon was the office. I was also spending some time in the Delhi office at that point of time. 5 years later, I took a move to EY Mumbai, again driven by the fact that my parents were moving out of Delhi, and it just felt like Bombay would be a better place for me to stay on my own. So I moved in 2011. 2012-13, that is the period when I got married, and my marriage did not last. So I was in the midst of divorce proceedings at that point of time. 2017 is when I had my first episode of a mental health crisis. And as luck would have it, I had the second one in the same year, because of which I thought, okay, maybe moving into an organization which has a slightly better concept of work-life balance might help. And I moved to Deloitte India in Mumbai. When I again took ill, I had a third episode of illness. And then I realized that, compared to EY and Deloitte, it worked better for me when I was at EY, even to manage my illness. And finally, after a lot of tribulation and, to think through whether the break would actually work for me or not, I finally ended up with my first career break. Now, between 2019 and 2021, I will get into more details. But during the course of the break, I actually took treatment, which helped me come back on my feet and again take up a job full time. So since 2021, I have been employed with JP Morgan in Mumbai. It's a full-time role, and I'll emphasize as to why I'm talking about the location repeatedly. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this is the aspect that, a lot of employers will try to probe you on as to, the journey they have in the form of your resume. They will have a few leading questions to ask you. But what the journey typically will not tell you is, why did the episode of mental health get triggered? Now, while one can say that it is not of relevance to the employer and not of relevance to even maybe, some family members or, friend circles, depending on the circles you move in, but it's important for you to know as to why that break actually happened. In some cases, the reasons are very straightforward. Maybe it is marriage and you had to relocate, or there was motherhood because of which you took an extended break. Whatever the reason might be, that clarity is something that you need to have as to why that break happened. Second point is about whether it was truly a 2-year break for me. The answer is no. It was a 1-year break, and I freelanced for a bit. Some employers, when I tried to get back to full-time work, did not consider that freelancing experience is equal to full-time experience. But some employers, on the other hand, were very happy to know that I was freelancing and the lessons that I learned from that stint as well. So the length of the break matters a lot. And again, clarity on why you took a break for that long will really help. Third point is, why am I mentioning location repeatedly? Now, as people who have taken breaks, it becomes important to see whether you are flexible enough to move to another location or not. Because what happens many times is the career break is driven by a location as well. In my case, I was very clear I wanted to remain in Mumbai even, for a longer period of time, even because my sister is based in Mumbai. And that governed a lot of my decision making. So while I was advised by my doctor to move back to Chennai where my parents are, I personally wanted to continue staying in Mumbai. So my job search was centered around Mumbai. Towards the end, I was a little, since I wanted to get back to work, I became a little more flexible regarding location. But heart of heart, I did not want to move out of Bombay. So, which is the reason why I'm emphasizing on location multiple times. The fourth point is any career break, unfortunately, leads to financial strain. And, each one's capacity to manage that financial strain is very different. In my case, what had happened was my financial planning actually took place right when I had my first mental health episodes. It was 2 years prior to the career break. And since I had already done that, I had a fair idea in terms of how long I could last without a job, whether I would be able to continue staying in Bombay without a job. Those questions were answered for me when I finally took the break. So that clarity helps again in terms of, what is the runway that you have in terms of managing when you don't have a job. Now, in some cases, if you're married and your spouse is supportive, that part is taken care of to some extent. If you're a mother, to some extent, again, probably it's taken care of. But in a lot of situations, the financial strain will be there. So you have to be mindful of that when you take a career break. In all this, what I also want to, repeatedly say is that my career break was not a one-time decision. I started off thinking I needed a break in 2012, then 13, then 17, then finally it happened in 19. So, there were various junctures at which I thought of a career break, and various people helped me at that point of time not to take the decision. But when the decision was taken, I was at peace. I knew I had done the right thing for me. And that's most important because careers today can last, well over 30 years, even though statistics for women are grim in terms of how long they can last in the workforce. But in a good ideal situation, careers will last well over 30, 35 years, because of which a break of a few years, whatever that period might be, really should not make much of a difference in terms of the longevity of a career. Next slide, please. So then comes the point that employers typically will ask you, in terms of what did you do during the career break? So in my case, for me, the point was very clear. I actually had to take treatment for my mental health. So that took me 2 full months to kickstart and actually put things in place. And then I had to continue with a lot of stuff that I was doing at that point also. So that was a clear thing that was the main reason for me to take a break. Second was, yes, I was looking for permanent roles, primarily based in Mumbai. So that took a while because of the kind of people I had to speak to, the people I could reach out to. For me personally, the option to return to my earlier employers at that point was not present because of the condition of my health. But for a lot of people, that is a good option to speak to your previous employers to see if they still have opportunities to bring you back into the workforce. Then I did freelance consulting for a year, and that was because I felt it is useful for me to be, still engaged with client work. And I also wanted to see realistically if freelancing is something that I can build a career in. I enjoyed my stint. I think I would in my 19 years of work ex, I think that is among the best stints I've had in terms of freelancing. But financially, it was not viable for me. So I had not cracked any big clients at that point of time. My clients were smaller clients. And while I was on a retainership with one of them for a while, wherein they would pay me by the hour, but it was still not, something that I could continue doing for a long time unless I cracked what is called an annuity business, where I would get regular revenues in over a year. The last point, which became important to me, and I continue talking about it even now after I have returned to work, is about creating awareness around mental health, because my workplace did have a role to play in the deterioration of my mental health. And I think it is important that people who take career breaks or who are trying to come back are able to talk about their mental health in a safe manner as well. So that is something I became extremely passionate about. And if you look at the logo on the slide deck as well, it is something I had got it designed so that, the Facebook page that I run, it's a little inactive at this point of time, but I was running it pretty regularly until recently. And I talk about mental health wherever I get a chance. So not everybody will go through a crisis the way I had gone, but it is important to remember that it can affect anybody, and it's intrinsically related to the kind of work that you do as well. So it's important to have some kind of an honest conversation about it with various people. Next slide, please. Now, yes, I am happy to say that I've got back, I got a job and I'm back into the workforce with the, knowledge that it could have not worked out as well. So there are some pointers that I will mention right now in terms of what I think helped me come back into the workforce. So the first one was, where am I going to source my leads from? So a lot of people, because I was already at the point of about 15 years of work ex, many people advised me Naukri is really not the place to go. You shouldn't be putting up your resume there because a lot of people in the consulting world would know you're looking out for a job. In my case, I was pretty clear that, irrespective of what somebody else got to know about the fact that I'm looking out for a job, it remained that I am looking out for a job. So if people got to know about it, I didn't have a problem with that. I went ahead and updated my resume on Naukri, and that is where I got several leads from as well. LinkedIn, on the other hand, did not work for me. Now, yes, probably now I know that there are people who are completely focused on their LinkedIn profile and are able to generate leads using LinkedIn. Personally, for me, it did not work out. Now, why is that the case? I did not delve into it because Naukri worked, but I think it is important for us to know that job sites are of various kinds, and depending on the skill sets that you're able to present, some job sites actually might work better for you than the others. Then comes, my job search was a fairly practical approach. I didn't think much about benchmarks, or I didn't think much about, what somebody else is doing. In my case, I was clear that I will not compromise on my passed on salary. Unfortunately, in India, the salary that we get from the next employer is based on what you draw previously. Now, since I had a career break, I had lost out on, growth for a couple of years, but I was clear that I will not come and join at a lower salary. That was something I was particular. And I think employers also valued that. They themselves, at least three of them told me that, we will not be able to hire you because you're at a slightly higher pay package at that point of time. But what I was definitely willing to do was to compromise on my designation. So I was clear that if I had to take one step down, I'm okay with it because it is more important for me to come back, and then I'll figure out my way in terms of promotions and my career growth as such. So that was the compromise I made. Third one was I interviewed with absolutely a wide set of companies. It is also possibly because my experience was with the CEO's office, so I could show relevance in terms of skill sets to more than one industry. But whether a smaller organization or a larger organization, I interviewed with many of them. Now, with smaller ones, I remember there was one particular organization which clearly told me, we like your profile, but we will not be able to afford you. But in the meantime, will you be willing to look at something which is part-time? I said, I'm happy to consider it, but that conversation did not move ahead. But I learned something about their business in the process of interviewing. So that I found very useful because the way employers were responding to me and the kind of questions I was being asked, I knew I was on the right track, and it was a matter of time before something worked out for me. What unfortunately for me also happened was there were a couple of organizations. One of them actually rolled out an offer to me as well, but I took ill right after getting the offer, so I couldn't join. Otherwise, my break would have been just for 4 months. But I still think that was a very important moment for me personally and professionally, because that is the point I decided if I don't get treated for what I'm going through, if I don't get the right diagnosis, I'm going to be in this cycle perpetually. Where I will fall ill, I'll probably quit, again come back, again quit. That cycle had to be put to an end if there was a possibility to do so. Fortunately for me, I did get the right diagnosis finally after 2 years. I did get the treatment and I responded well to the treatment as well. So, for me to be able to come back, it was very important that that cycle had to be broken in terms of the career break itself. Then, probably because I was anyway writing a fair bit and, I was open with the tribulations that I was going through. I owned my journey and the career break. I was not apologetic about my career break at any stage. I was very clear that it is something I had to do, both for my personal health and for my mental peace. I needed the break. And I was also very clear that I thought of a career as a long term investment. So even if somebody and interviewers do try to put you on the back foot the minute they realize there is a break in service, but since I was so clear about it, beyond a point people did not question. They just left it when they heard that yes, it was treatment for mental health issues. Finally, this is something that people may be able to relate to, may not be able to relate to, but I just thought I will touch upon it a little bit. Being women, there are certain workplace trauma situations which are very unique, primarily because we are women. A lot of men will not face certain situations, and therefore, in my case, a lot of trauma accumulated over a period of time. So I actually went in for therapy just to deal with that aspect as well, because same, it comes down to the crux of my career. I wanted to last for a longer period of time. I need to be healthy, and this is an important aspect to determine whether I would be able to continue working or not. So that is something again I had done. It's an ongoing thing. Even after all these 3 years of coming back, I still continue, so that any small situation doesn't escalate, I continue taking therapy even now. Next slide, please. Now, the interesting part, this was something I could have never imagined and planned for. There were a host of external factors which also played a key role in my coming back. The first one is COVID. In an unnatural way, what happened was, because everybody was working from home and there was prolonged working from home for most people, a lot of discussion around mental health began. So even if, 5 years earlier, if I had taken this break, it would have been even more difficult for me to even speak about, the fact that the nature of my career break. In this case, COVID actually eased it for me, where people were anyway talking about it. I was just one more person who had gone through something significant, and employers were a little more receptive than before. Second one was, I wanted to switch industries, and I realized that global capability centers have roles which fit in with my experience. And there was a complete boom in terms of work at the global capability centers across locations. So, since I was looking at financial services, Bombay was offering more than one opportunity. In one particular case, when I interviewed, I had requested that I don't want to be posted in Pune. I wanted to be in Bombay. But at that point of time, it was pre-COVID days. They said no. Today, I'm sure if they had met me again, they would probably consider it's not a big deal if I'm based in Bombay and I'm traveling to Pune. So those things changed because of COVID as well. And in terms of trends, because there's so much investment happening in global capability centers, it became easy for new roles to come up. And I was fortunate to get one such role which had cropped up. The third is, and this is something unique to, because we are women from IIM Indore, there is this presence of this network, women from IIMs across batches, across institutes, and it is a very powerful network now. So this got established in 2019, just when I had taken my break, and I met an amazing number of people or interacted with multiple of them, even if I have not met them. And that boosted my confidence in various aspects of my life, whether it is in terms of how to present my resume or in terms of actually having somebody to discuss ideas with. So that network made a huge difference. Many of you might already be aware of the network, but if you're not part of the network, please join. I think it's very valuable, and the insights you get will really make a difference to your career as well. Next slide, please. comes the interesting part. This year, I was headed for a second career break. I again took ill. Of course, the nature of illness was a little different this time. Jan Feb, I was not keeping well. And the kind of work that I was doing at that point of time was extremely strenuous in terms of response time. The work was not strenuous, but the response time expected of me was very significant. Now, because of which, either I could have, pulled myself through for another 6 months and then given it up, or proactively take a break earlier before a situation deteriorates and then figure out what needs to be done. So, because I had asked for a sabbatical and as per policy, that was not available to me as an option, then I knew I couldn't continue in that particular role. So I put in my papers and then I started reaching out to people. Now, was this a sensible decision in terms of a career? Probably not, because given how the economy is at this point of time, one really doesn't know whether one will get another job. And I am now close to nearly 20 years of experience, so it just becomes a little tougher. But again, this time again, I was clear in my head that if I continue in a situation which is not working for me, I will pay the penalty 6 months down the line. And that was not something I was willing to risk over a period of time. But what happened? Next slide, please. I came up with a plan. I came up with what I would want to do in this career break. So one was, of course, now that my experience range had reached almost about 20 years, I reached out to a couple of senior women from the IIM network and asked them to, give their views on my resume and let me know how else can I present some of the information. I got extremely good feedback. I have been able to implement some of it. There is still work to be done in terms of implementation of some of the other feedback. So that's work in progress. Second thing I thought, after seeing how, I have been somebody who has never had an official mentor in my career. For good or bad reasons, that has been the way it is. I've also not had coaches in my career. But what I've had for a very long time is sponsorship. People who work with me speak about me behind me, and I get opportunities because of that. So at Ernst & Young, where I spent 11 years of my career, I had very senior sponsors who would start to talk to other people, and that's how I got 5 different roles in Ernst & Young. So that is something I've always had, but I felt the need for a career coach. So I've identified somebody that I want to work with. It is still work in progress because we are going to speak to each other to see whether we fit, for whether she's a fit for me and whether I am a fit for her, and then see how best the career coaching can move on. What I had also told her was that I need to work through some things through my therapy as well. So while I finish that, that is when I will come back to taking coaching specific to career as well. Third thing was, I now see there are more freelancing opportunities than before. So I was clear that if it was meant to be a career break, I would get back to freelancing. What also happened was, during the course of these conversations that I was having, a senior person in my organization said, "Will you consider freelancing for us?" I said, "I'm open to it. If something doesn't work out, I'm more than happy to be considered for that as well." So new doors opened for me. These are all initial conversations. They may or may not have worked out, but at least I was making progress in terms of the various options that I could explore for. Last thing is, because I enjoy writing and I have been published once, I was keen on taking the self-publishing route and publishing, at least one book. I have 3-4 book ideas, but at least one I wanted to finish before this career break ended. But what happened was something different. Next slide, please. 1 week before my last day at the organization, I got an internal role change. I met a senior MD whom I had spoken to. There was a role. The HR helped me, apply for the same. And the MD was keen on meeting me despite knowing that I had already put down my papers. Now, that is something you can't bargain for. And I still don't know why he felt the need to actually talk to me, even though I had put in my papers. But when I met him and, he sort of understood what sort of he was the first person who actually asked me directly, what sort of flexibility do you need with your health condition? And I told him the primary thing that I need is, suppose a particular week is going really bad for me, I would prefer to work from home the entire week, because I have a very transparent face, and people know when I'm not doing well, because I have a very severe form of depression. So you can actually see it on my face when things are not going on well. And his reaction immediately was, "Oh, that's it." I said, "Yes, that's what I need in case something like this happens again." Now, the reason this flexibility actually matters is because in the organization, we actually have a mandate that at least 3 days of a week you're supposed to be in office. And it gets tracked, monitored across levels very, very stringently. So we actually have statistics which are published, and you are allowed to track your own attendance as well. So when I pointed that out to him, I said, there is this issue as well. He said, "You're anyway going to be able to make it up once you're well, so don't worry about it." So as a senior person, he recognized that, my requirement for accommodation, which is what is actually called in the context of disability as a reasonable accommodation, was very minuscule. It is something which could easily be done. So he was okay with that. And then he realized as I started working with him that, it is not something I'm going to demand just like that. It is only when I actually need it. So that trust factor, once it started getting built in, the association also started improving. And then I was being looked at only for my work and nothing more. In fact, the previous team that I was a part of, the senior person said, "I wouldn't have even realized you're unwell until you told me." I said that's exactly how it is. 11 months out of 12, I just might be perfectly okay. But that 1 month actually might be really bad for me. And that probably will determine how you look at me as a working professional as well. So that is something that I had actually, that was a difference in the approach of these two gentlemen. Uh, Fortunately for me, it worked out 1 week before I left. If this had worked out after I left, there was actually an official cooling off period in the organization. I think almost for about anything between 6 months to 1 year, depending on the role. I would have actually not had a job in that interim period. So this is what happened as recently as a couple of months back. Next slide, please. Now, when it comes to a career break, what also happens is we lose confidence in different aspects of our life. And, that constant questioning, inner talk, which goes on to say, whether am I good enough, whether I can actually come back, all those things also need to be dealt with. So the first point that I say, typically for women, people talk about soulmates and you have to find the one. In a career as well, focus on one, which basically means is we need one job at any given point of time. It is not campus placements where there is, a race to get multiple job offers and, make the best, pick the best out of them. In this case, just stay clear on the fact that you need one job to get back and you will get it. There are enough and more jobs for people who are qualified. And all said and done, there is a platform that the IIM network has given us. Yes, it matters more when you are in the initial stages of your career, because after that, it is only your work which matters. It doesn't matter where you've studied from. But it's still a very powerful network and a very powerful brand to have in your resume. So remember that and focus on getting that one job that you need. Second is, there are organizations which now run official return to work programs. Now, these return to work programs typically take the form of an internship, and I think, they start off with application processes, anytime between October to December in time for their next financial year. Typically, that's how it works. Now, these return to work programs are advertised on LinkedIn specifically. So it's a good thing, a good idea to keep track of these return to work programs, because they are almost, I think a lot of organizations have it on an annual basis now. Again, depending on performance, you will actually get a full-time role. But what people don't tell you is many of these internship programs fail because there is no actual job requisition at the end of it as well. So what I mean by that is, while they are happy to take you as an intern and show that, this return to work program is something which is successful, they may not have an actual position to offer in some cases. So don't get disheartened by that. It is still better to go through the return to work program than not go through it. Second is, when it comes to the return to work program, it depends on which stage of your career you are at as well. So what happened in one particular case, because my break was a combination of 1 year complete break plus 1 year of freelancing, the organization did not view it as a minimum 2-year break criteria. And also, because I had already had about 15 years of experience and given the pedigree, etc., the senior person, they got a senior person to speak to me, and she basically said, look, I know you're good, I know you can do your work, but I don't think you're the right fit for this particular internship because you're more senior than what we are looking for. And you will get frustrated, and we will not be able to help you at that point of time as well. At that point, I felt very stung. I felt, okay, here is another chance which is going away. But in retrospect, and now when I reflect on what she did for me, I have only gratitude for her because she was absolutely right. I would have got frustrated. I would have eventually quit. And it would have been a bad situation both for the organization and for me. So that timely feedback, which came through an unlikely resource like a return to work program, really helped me. So keep track of, and there are many organizations. I know that all major MNC GCCs, which are in the financial services industry, have a return to work program. So network with people who are there and see if that is of liking to you. Is it something that you can actually do depending on the stage of career that you are at, and go for it. Third is, while a lot of women are very good at drawing personal boundaries, I think it is even more important when you're coming back after a career break. So, there are multiple reasons why we take a career break, but most of them have something in common, which is a need for flexibility. So you have to be clear in terms of what sort of flexibility that you are looking for. Like I gave in my example, in my case, it happens to be work from home for maybe 1 week, 10 days, till the time that particular phase of illness dissipates. Your case might be something different. Be clear. There are people who will be willing to negotiate on that as well, but you have to be clear in terms of what flexibility you are looking at. Secondly, in terms of locations. Now, there are people who, while wanting to come back to work, have actually taken a location change as well. So, even if you are based in a certain location, if that particular opportunity actually works for you, you have to be clear in terms of where your location flexibility is. Because where employers start getting angry about is, yes, there are people who will say yes to anything that they offer, but once they enter the organization, that is when the true, need comes up, and then it becomes a very difficult thing to negotiate, and then you have attrition, which again happens. So be clear on that. Be honest about what will work for you, what will not work for you. The next one is, irrespective of how long you have worked, whether it's 1 year or 15, 16 years, in my case, the initial days of coming back to work are very difficult because you are not meeting as many people as before. The kind of work, the nature of work would have probably changed over a period of time. You have a lot more youngsters who have come in who are, eager to prove themselves and doing very well. So the dynamics of the organization will be very different from the time you quit and from the time you're actually coming back. In my case, what, helped in a big way was the first 6 months of because I was recruited during COVID, the first 6 months of my stint with JP Morgan were actually work from home. So that helped me manage my health a lot better. And by the time we were expected to come back to work, I was in a much better position because I was working again. I had more confidence. I had got to know a few people. And then it was much easier. Here, of course, an external factor worked for me, but it is very important to keep in mind that the initial days will be tough, but you will be able to overcome and move on. It will not be an issue. For somebody like me who's an introvert, I have always met people, I have always spoken to multiple people, and to push myself to do that again was a little bit of a challenge because, I was on the back foot because of my health. But eventually I knew that unless I went and met and spoke to people, nothing would work out for me. So that is something I began doing consciously. And also that feedback was reiterated to me during my therapy sessions as well, that irrespective of the nature of illness you have, it is important to have that social contact. So I worked very hard on that. Personally, that was a huge area of growth for me where I had to literally force myself to pick up the phone and call people, or to talk to people or to reach out, etc. As an introvert, it is something that you really need to continue doing as well. Then, of course, comes the larger picture of, what sort of industry trends are there, what is upskilling requirement of industries. Those are things you can keep track of in your free time. Speak to people in the industry. A lot of people are pretty nice when you reach out to them on LinkedIn and ask them for advice. So do that. At best, any of you, if you have been in sales, would know the conversion of an actual sale is maybe 16% or 20%. So you have 80% of the leads which will not move ahead, but 20% definitely will. So take that approach here as well, where don't worry about failure, but definitely reach out to as many people as you can. And the last thing that I will say is stay kind to yourself throughout this process. I think it becomes very important that, especially when your peers from the IIMs or your work colleagues, they would have all moved ahead, at some stage as you are taking your career break. Don't let that bog you down too much. Yes, relative grading is reality in the IIM, so we tend to compare ourselves a little more than what is required. But don't let that bog you down, because each one's journey is different, and I'm sure what you bring to the table is something none of us can bring to the table. So with this, I will stop.